ball has dropped on 2025, and Ohio State has dropped the ball on the way to trying to defend the national championship. Miami upsets the Buckeyes 24-14 right here at AT&T Stadium on New Year's Eve in the Cotton Bowl, a college football playoff quarterfinal. These are snap judgments. He's Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward for 97.1 The Fan and 10 TV. Birm is a stunner.
It is, but it's also in ways predictable because there was a blueprint for how to beat this Ohio State team, and Indiana exposed it by just a lot of movement up front, dominating Ohio State's offensive line, which had been okay all year. But the Buckeyes gave up 5 sacks for the second straight game. Julian saying the clock in his head got rattled very early, first drive of the game, second play of the game for Ohio State. And from there on out, Miami saw an opportunity to really pin its ears back. And the difference to me is that you see a team in Miami that's built from the inside out. The Buckeyes, all year long, we've been kind of waiting for a team to have a power run game that could neutralize the Buckeyes defense. And while it wasn't always Mark Fletcher, it wasn't always the Miami offensive line, a lot of times tonight it was Carson Beck, who his experience getting out of the pocket when things started to feel uncomfortable, picking up key yards, there's 3 or 4 major differences tonight. Those are 2 of them. Special teams, of course, for Ohio State. And it's a reminder of what Ryan Day said all year. Like, the issues are always there. And in the last 2 Ohio State games, the issues that were there exploded on Ohio State. And, I think the team did a really good job at halftime, making adjustments, coming out, throwing some counter punches. But you get 3 drives in the second half, and you score on the first 2, you don't score on the third, and you lose.
Yeah, it's hard to really comprehend that was the situation that Ohio State put itself in, because coming out of the Indiana game and with 25 days, again, you can call it off, you can also call it 25 days to prepare, where Ohio State's been, and Ryan Day was getting more directly involved with the offense, self-scouting, self-correcting, looking at 13 games body of work, but also specifically what went wrong against Indiana with 1 offensive touchdown. And then you come out and you don't score at all in the first half, and you're negative offensively because of the pick 6 that happened right over here to my right from Julian Sayin, trying to solve a red zone woe that had been one of the Achilles heel for the Buckeyes all year long. They try a screen, a block is missed, it goes the other way, and you're down 14-0. I know that you can find something to spread the blame around for all 3 phases if you want to. You mentioned a team that had a running game like Mark Fletcher, a quarterback with veteran savvy like Carson Beck to go. He gets a 3rd and 11 with his legs. He converts a couple times or extends plays and scrambles and gets positive yardage out of situations where in almost every other game throughout this year, Ohio State turns those into sacks and flips the field. But to me, the Silver Bullets giving up 17 points in a college football playoff quarterfinal, that should always be good enough for them to win, just the same way that I thought 13 points against Indiana was going to be good enough for them to win the Big Ten championship game. So to me, I know there are a couple plays on special teams that proved very costly again, including a missed field goal. That should have made it even right there, 17-17. That first half and the lack of pass protection, the lack of consistency from the run game, something has to be done about the future of this offense now, and that's I think the most difficult thing to wrap your mind around, is that Ryan Day has been known for cutting edge offenses and expanding the passing attack, and then it completely vanished against Miami. That's not to say that Miami is not good, that they didn't deserve to be here, that their defense is not filled with playmakers. We talked about Messidor and Bain and Scott and all those guys coming into this game, but the Buckeyes being held scoreless in the first half of a Cotton Bowl is unthinkable to me.
It is, but again, you had 3 possessions in the first half, and so that is what Ryan Day has built this offense to be this year. And so I think there are fundamental questions he's going to have to ask himself about, is that the way to move forward? It was 10 years ago against Clemson, Ohio State got shut out 31-0 in the college football playoff that night in Phoenix. That ushered in Ryan Day's offense into Ohio State. And now Ryan, we've seen him alter it over the years, and I don't know if that's the right way to go. I think that, you can look at a game like this and still find arguments. Like, hey, sure, okay, you make a field goal at the end of the first half, it's a tie game. And you don't need to have panic throws down the field with Julian Sayin with 8 minutes to go, because you can still run the football, which you had been doing very effectively throughout the entire game. Ohio State, their running backs ran the ball very well tonight. Yeah. Now, you look at the numbers and it says they have 25 rushing yards or something like that, but that's because Julian Sayin's losses on sacks count against the rushing numbers. But Bo Jackson and CJ Donaldson were picking up 5 yards a carry. The Buckeyes were not beat up front in the run game. They were beat up front because Gabe Van Sickle earned the first start. I'd like to know what he did to earn it, because when Josh Padilla came into the game in the second half, things sure looked a lot different.
Yeah.
So I guess I have questions about that. You lose Austin Sarabell for the entire second half. Your stalwart, your best offensive lineman all season long, and kudos to Ian Moore, who did a really good job in a very difficult position. Like, there are things that you can look at, but ultimately, fundamentally, is an offense that's taking 35, 40 seconds to get a playoff every single time what you need to do when you have talent like Ohio State has on the outside, and when you have talent like Ohio State has a quarterback. And I just don't think it is. And so, it is going to be a offseason of reflection for Ryan Day. Again, special teams is a disaster. And it's not just Jaden Fielding, who again missed an extremely important kick in a game that could have changed the outcome of this game. The Buckeyes can't find a punter who can hit it more than 40 yards. And then the one time he did tonight, the one time Joe McGuire hit one good, the biggest moment of the day for him, he puts it down to the 10, field flip for the first time all night, and Ohio State has a extra guy in the backfield and has to re-kick it. It ends up being a 25-yard penalty total. Like, that's just, you just can't do it. But it's not even that. It's just, it is a lack of understanding in those key moments on the special teams that has been a problem for year after year after year. There's a lot of things that went wrong tonight. But if you think about it, like, this was predictable if the Buckeyes played the way they played in the first half, and then they did. And so, like, they were never an unbeatable team this year. They just didn't make mistakes. And tonight, they made mistakes. That's the first defensive score they'd allowed all season, I'm pretty sure. It is another missed field goal. It is Jeremiah Smith missing a block on the defensive score that, who knows? But it's just that type of stuff. You can't give good teams free possessions. You can't give good teams points.
It's incredibly confounding. And I know that people will say that that's how I react every time Ohio State loses.
It's pretty rare.
Most times they are favorites, like they were again tonight. Now, the line dropped down to 7.5 at the final gun, and there were a lot of people that thought maybe Miami's defensive front was going to create a lot of problems for Ohio State, which they did. And I hate to keep saying it over and over, because Miami was deserving of winning this game, and they had really good talent on both sides of the ball. I continue to believe, and I do again tonight, it is issues that Ohio State created for itself that cost them the game. Even though Miami is a deserving winner, and Indiana was at the start of December, Ohio State did more to lose this game, in my personal opinion. And we can debate that if you want. That's how I feel. That's how I'm going to feel, because they were still a more talented team, 1 through 85, than Miami. Sonny Styles said that after the game. It's like, they were good enough to win a national championship. They were good enough to beat Miami, and they're never going to get over the fact that they couldn't do that.
And there's going to be moments of there are going to be things from this game that haunt people like Sonny Styles all season long, for the rest of his life. Sonny Styles did not miss a tackle the entire season. Until tonight.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just Sonny Styles. It was the worst tackling performance Ohio State has had all year long, across the board. Sometimes the ball bounces a funny way. Caleb Downs hits Malachi Toney perfectly on a key third down play. The ball bounces to Malachi Toney as he's running, and he picks up an additional 5 yards that allows Miami to hit a 49-yard field goal. There's things, sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way. The ball had bounced Ohio State's way for 12 straight games, and in the last 2, it didn't. And I know that that's not going to make people happy as we enter 2026. Happy New Year to everyone out there watching this. Sorry that your night was ruined, but this is sports. This is what football is about. Sometimes you lose. Sometimes you don't do the things you need to do, and Ohio State did not execute. It executed itself multiple times, and I think that's where people will be the most frustrated, because you can see the same recipe to beat Ohio State in all of their losses in the last couple of years. And so, again, it's going to be a long offseason for Ryan Day to figure out what exactly is missing. And you don't want to say that too loudly. They just won a national championship. This program is not falling apart. There's none of that happening. Jelani Thurman entered the transfer portal, by the way, after the game. I'm sure you'll see more of those, the guys who had already made that decision. But with the portal opening on Friday, you'll see a rush of guys that will be departing. But the program's not falling apart. The sky's not falling on Ohio State. But that doesn't mean you don't have to make changes. When you look at the staff alignment moving forward, that is going to be a key element. I know that there are people who looked at Justin Fry and his tenure here, didn't think he did a good enough job. I think maybe there's some hindsight there, probably saying, hey, maybe bringing in a guy who hadn't coached the offensive line in 7 years, and then bringing in two journeymen with him. That was an attempt to patchwork some stuff. Maybe it didn't work. I don't know. He coached tight ends for years. Maybe Keenan Bailey, who's never coached it, should coach receivers. There's a lot of things that Ryan Day is going to have to figure out. But it hurts. Like this team, these guys. I mean, again, no one cares. Ryan Day makes a lot of money. All these guys make a lot of money. But when you are watching these guys leave the field, Keenan Bailey walking out of here, tears in his eyes. Brian Hartline did not want to leave that room, hugging Ryan Day, and Keenan Bailey, and Matt Patricia. They felt like they did everything they could. And at some point, guys have to make plays. And Miami had a couple guys make plays tonight when Ohio State didn't. And ultimately, that's how you lose a football game to a good team. Miami, you got to remember this, 3 months ago, was the prohibitive national champion favorite. And you saw why tonight, because that front five on their offensive line and that front four, front seven, especially on the defense, was really, really good. Yeah. And so there's fundamental questions Ohio State has to answer there too. How do you build a program from now on? You can't pass up a guy like Jeremiah Smith, obviously, but football's still one inside out. And when you look at where Ohio State has struggled on the recruiting trail in the last couple of years, it's been the trenches. And now they've made do. They've had good players. They found ways to patchwork some stuff together, but that front four from Miami is just a bunch of 5 stars, and that front five on the offensive line, just a bunch of 5 stars.
Yeah.
And that's what you need.
Yeah, and I think that's a personnel conversation that will be had in January. Certainly when the transfer portal opens, there's nothing you can add to the signing class that was done at the beginning of December for Ohio State. But how you coach that and how you develop it, that's going to have to be looked at here for Ohio State because changes are coming in, and as we said, as we start to look into 2026 already, Brian Hartline is going to be gone. This was a major audition for Keenan Bailey, for Tyler Bowen, for Billy Fessler, and a one-game sample size isn't going to be the final arbiter, but combining that with Indiana, combining that with even
you have to
you look at the second half of the year and going back even further. This is not the fully maximized version of the Ohio State offense that anyone has come to expect, and there's no argument that you could make that it is when you score 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games, when they're the talent equated, to use the terminology of Ohio State, when they are hardware games and you are completely bottled up. I don't know what that means in terms of who Ryan Day specifically needs to bring in, what the alignment of that staff is going to look like, but if and I strongly believe this, at least my reporting would suggest that these 3 games that they were hoping to play were going to tell if the infrastructure was sound, if the way the Buckeyes were operating their offense was going to work into the future, if they needed an outside voice or did not need an outside voice. I think it's pretty clear now what direction you're going to have to go, because you didn't even get to game 2 or game 3 and you went into the locker room and you made some nice adjustments and you scored a couple touchdowns and you were maybe in position to go win the game until you get a holding call and Miami generates pressure to create that. It didn't work. You cannot have 27 points in 2 postseason games when you have a defense that is as good as Ohio State's. Miami's defensive line outproduced Ohio State's defensive line, but there was I'm not pointing fingers at the Silver Bullets for this game. They did enough to win a playoff game.
It's arguable, I think. Obviously, there's going to be Ohio State fans out there who will look back and say, oh, that felt like the end of the losses in the Jim Knowles era, where you just couldn't get off the field, where you had to make a stop and you couldn't. There's going to be those conversations, those arguments. It doesn't matter. You have to fix it moving forward. And now you have to find out how, or is there a scenario, is there a way where Caden McDonald, someone like that, is able to bring himself back and say, I'm not going to go out this way? Does the fact that he won a national championship make it easier? There are things, and there's going to be a ton of postmortems about this season, similar, I think, in ways to 2019. I don't know that it maybe should be, but it's going to feel that way, because if we go back to March, the widespread belief was, hey, beat Michigan, we get to the playoff, and it's an okay year. It doesn't feel that way today. It's not going to feel that way for the next few weeks. It's not going to feel that way for the next few months until Ohio State puts on the helmet and lines up again. But there are conversations now when you see what you have to build. And Ryan Day is still a young coach. He's going to continue to get better. Ohio State is not going anywhere, but it sucks. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Miami.
Well, yeah, because this team changed the expectations in real time and was capable of winning a national championship. That's why it stings. That's why an upset loss like this it feels so shocking and is difficult to wrap your mind around, because Ohio State had everything that they could have possibly wanted as it developed over the course of the year. There was no certainty in March or April or August or week 1 against Texas that Julian Sayin was going to be a Heisman Trophy finalist. And if you had offered all the things that you mentioned, going 12-0 in the regular season, sending Julian Sayin to New York, all the awards that you were accumulating on the defensive side of the football, what you got from Matt Patricia as a defensive coordinator, which was an absolute home run of a hire. You didn't know for sure that would be the case in March, in April, in June, July, and August. All those things, if you had offered it, or if you bought into the national narrative, there's too much for Ohio State to replace off the national championship team, it's all eyes on 2026. It would have been easy 4 months ago to say, I'll take that. That's pretty good. That means that there will be a springboard into 2026. But that's the thing about Ohio State and their standard being the standard and how dominant they looked at times, that all that stuff is by the wayside. Yeah. And maybe in a month's time or 2 months' time, there'll be a greater appreciation for what this team accomplished to this point. But it's not right now. No, and I want to be careful here, because I've said before, every loss doesn't need to be a referendum on the program. But now, even 12 months after a national championship, 2026 is going to be a different year for Ohio State. There are a lot of really, really good players who are going to be leaving this program. Caleb Downs, Carnell Tate, Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Davis Enigmanosin, the entire defense potentially, except for like 2 guys. Like, you have to go out and prove that the standard is a standard. And losing in this fashion, losing in this way, is not going to make anybody feel optimistic. But we saw it happen before. You spring back, you bounce back. Ohio State's the most recession-proof program in college football nationally, and has been for 100 years. But now it's on Ryan Day to show that he can, once again, make the moves that he has to make to fix it. No one's going to feel good today. No one's going to feel good weeks from now. But again, you move forward. That's what you have to do. Congratulations to Miami. They earned it. They played really, really well. It takes a near perfect performance to beat Ohio State. Indiana was nearly perfect. Miami was nearly perfect. If you want to deep dive into why Ohio State wasn't as prepared or didn't look as prepared, we can certainly have that conversation over these next few months, because I think that there are a number of questions that people will have. I don't think this is a throw the baby out with the bathwater type of situation, but you hate to lose this way. And I know to the longtime Ohio State fans out there, it does feel in some ways similar to like the 90s, when you lose at the last 2 games of the season and you're like, well, now what was all that winning for? Because all the awards, all the Matt Patricia hire, everything, none of it means anything now. It will in a couple of years, when people look back and say, oh, that was a great team, and shoot, should have done better. But now you have to make sure Matt Patricia's on this staff next year, so that you don't have to fundamentally change everything again. Now you need to see if Caden McDonald or Arvell Reese, Kenyatta Jackson, find a way to get Caden Curry another year. I don't know. I think that Ohio State, the coaches, the players are all going to leave this stadium. They're mostly gone now with a lot of what ifs. And unfortunately, 2025 for Ohio State goes down as another what if season, along with 1996, 1998, 2015, 2019, 2022. That sometimes is life of an Ohio State fan. We've lived it a lot. And the Buckeyes always bounce back, and they will again. No one cares about that tonight. Sorry, your New Year's was ruined. Yeah, that'll be quite a New Year's Day hangover, and no real rooting interest left there for Ohio State in the rest of that college football playoff. But it was a wild 2025 covering Ohio State. It has been a challenging 2025 in a lot of fronts. This wasn't the way that I anticipated it ending for Ohio State, but that is reality. So as you said, you have to turn the page. You get to January 1 in 2026, and Ohio State will go back to the drawing board. They have a lot of ways they are going to have to do that: personnel, coaching staff, alignment. Ryan Day at the top deciding what fixes have to be made, and setting out those resolutions to get Ohio State back so they can compete in a place like this again in a year's time. But that's it. That is the last snap judgments of 2025. It's already 2026 if you're on the East Coast. We're not quite there yet here in Dallas, where another Cotton Bowl has come and gone for Ohio State. 3 years in a row and 2 losses, and the offense was pretty porous in 2 of those 3. It's the way it goes. On to the next one.
Thank you so much for all of your support as we have tried to cover this team this year. Can't wait to 2026. Onward and upward.
We appreciate all of you who have followed along, and thank you so much for 97.1, 10 TV, 10 TV Plus, everywhere you get these podcasts. That's the end of the coverage of the Ohio State 2025 football season. But, tomorrow also we'll turn the page and we'll start talking about the Buckeyes again. Probably this game a little bit more, but then a lot more about what that future actually holds. So happy New Year. And as Birm said, thank you so much. We sincerely appreciate everyone who has followed along with our work and supported this step in the journey. On to the 2026 version. Miami wins 24-14 in the AT&T Cotton Bowl Classic College Football Playoff Quarterfinal. Buckeyes are out. He's Birm. I'm Austin. Happy New Year.